Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker,
I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
and we're the Insiders. And this week we're talking about a topic that has dominated politics in Wisconsin for the last couple of years and will probably dominate it for a long time to come, and that is the subject of abortion. We saw recently that Planned Parenthood has decided to reopen its clinics in Milwaukee and Madison and start performing abortion services again, based upon the decision of a single judge in Dane County. Seems a little risky, doesn't it, Chuck?
Well, it would be, except that I think the biggest thing is, frankly, not just the decision. I think it's also the fact that the major entities out there that might enforce against Planned Parenthood, the executive branch, the attorney general, the DAs in the particular counties that they operate, have all stated publicly, I believe they've all stated publicly, that they will not enforce this prohibition. And based upon the decision of the judge. And I think if you got a different decision, it'd be different. But remember, this is kind of a situation where Republicans are now have been thrown into disarray by this. They they kind of are the dog that caught the car here. They are now realizing that women in Wisconsin do not buy the idea that a bunch of white guys in Madison should decide how their bodies should be governed. And women are voting overwhelmingly. The Protasiewicz election was the latest example, and by a landslide, that this is not going to happen. And Republicans have responded with, well, let's have maybe a certain number of weeks. Let's have certain exceptions. And what they're finding out is that this is a very complex issue. And this is why in the United States, the bastion of freedom in the world, that we say we leave this to the individual to make the decision, because we don't know what's going on at the end of a pregnancy when something terrible comes up. Let's leave that in the hands of that family and their doctor to make the right decision. And Republicans are trying to fashion something that they can do to still keep that evangelical base with them and yet give some flexibility to women. It's not working.
So I really found it interesting that they chose to open up the clinics in Milwaukee and Madison. You're right. There's no one's going to prosecute them in those communities for it, but they didn't open up the one in Sheboygan because that probably would open them up to some sort of legal liability. That decision by the judge in Dane County is bizarre, really, if you think about it. We've all spent the last 2 years talking about Wisconsin's 1849 law that bans abortion. And the judge in Dane County said, well, this law isn't even about abortion. It's not even about abortion at all. Well, wait, the attorney general said it was an abortion ban. The governor said it was an abortion ban. Democratic politicians all over the state did. The media and big blaring headlines said it was the 1849 law banned abortion. Everybody thought that law banned abortion, except apparently a judge in Dane County. I don't know that decision is the one on which the final answer in Wisconsin from the courts will come. My guess is it'll be their foundation will be very different for whatever decision the Wisconsin Supreme Court comes down with on abortion. I don't think they're going to build it off of the case or the decision that came out in Dane County. You are right. I think that Republicans are trying to find their footing here. When they stare at the polling, Republicans go, well, 70% of the people in the state support some sort of restrictions on abortion. In fact, almost 2/3 say that they would support a 20-week ban on abortion. That's actually a law in Wisconsin that if you take the 1849 law away, now you've, I think, reanimated essentially the 20-week ban law that we passed, I think, during the Walker years in Wisconsin. But they can't seem to get that message across that Democrats want no restrictions and they want reasonable restrictions. They keep trying with legislation, they keep trying with press conferences, but they are definitely struggling to get across the message that they want reasonable restrictions on abortion. And that's why I think you saw legislation that Senator Romaine Quinn and others put forward that would go back to that 1849 law, make some technical changes to it to make sure that no one thinks that medical procedures required after a miscarriage would count as an abortion under that 1849 law.
I think one of the reasons why people have been educated, and I think they realize now that there are all sorts of things that can come up even very late in a pregnancy after 20 weeks where I think the vast majority of people, if they heard the facts, would say, oh, yes, well, we certainly should have an exception for that. So I think what people are coming to is, let's leave this decision to the family. The woman who has this this pregnancy, she's the one who can make the decision. And we've heard from women who have children who desperately want to have the child. And yet there is something going on that isn't the right thing to do for that family. And maybe that child would be born and dead within a few weeks. There, I don't want to make these decisions. I don't pretend to know that. I don't pretend to know what's the right thing to do there. Why are we trying to impose a law? This is where you let individuals in their exercise of their own freedom do it. So that's one component of it. With regard to the Republicans and where they're coming down on this, the bottom line is that they have people who want to say that the moment of conception, there's life. In fact, by the way, the Republicans, many of them want to outlaw contraception. A lot of their supporters do. When you have that kind of tug and pull in a very strong way within your base, it's very hard for them to get to some other answer. And I do not think they're going to get there. And best, guess what? The electorate has figured out these people just aren't on our side. I don't care what they're articulating. We have to go with the people who will support our freedom. And I think this is something that will only get worse for Republicans the more these discussions are had and the more legislation that's introduced. And frankly, every time the Republicans mention this word, Scott and I have talked about this many times, he who controls the subject of the debate controls the win or loss. And right now, the more discussion of abortion in whatever form, it means the Republicans are losing even more big time.
I think the Republicans' big challenge is that they are powerless to find a different position, in that they no longer control all the levers in government. They have a Supreme Court that will probably overturn whatever the heck they decide to do. They have a governor who will veto whatever they decide to do. So they are stuck with a position that they had in the past, rather than allowing them to fine tune a position to the present climate. I do think that the law that passed with a 20-week ban is a good place for them to stand. But instead they're sticking with the 1849 law, which is one that I think is not necessarily working with the times on this issue.
It's a complex issue. I think women in Wisconsin will have the final say. See you next time.
See you next week.